You have been carrying a weight that does not belong to your name. And the first truth today is that God has not forgotten what was taken from you. You may have learned how to keep moving while your heart stayed behind, but heaven has not confused survival with surrender. The loss was real, the silence was real, the delay was real, and still none of it erased the promise over your life. There are things that were pulled from your hands, your peace, your time, your strength, and even your confidence. And you have lived long enough with the ache of that absence. Yet what was stolen in one season does not become permanent just because it lasted a while. God sees the empty places that other people ignored. He sees the invoice nobody paid, the apology nobody gave, and the nights when you sat in the dark wondering why everything seemed to be slipping away. He also sees that you did not stop believing completely, even when belief became thinner than breath. There is a difference between what was removed from you and what was removed from your life by permission, and that difference matters. Today, the Spirit is turning your attention toward restoration, not as a slogan, but as a serious and holy return. You are not being asked to pretend it never hurt. You are being invited to stand where the loss happened and learn that heaven still keeps records. What left your hand did not leave God's sight. What was taken did not disappear from his memory. And what he remembers, he is able to visit again. Think of a room in your house where you know exactly what should be there and is not there anymore. Maybe a drawer, a shelf, or the place where an old photograph used to rest. The space itself becomes a witness because absence has a shape, and your eyes keep returning to it without permission. You open that drawer and feel the little shock of recognition, the way your chest tightens before your mind even speaks. That is how some losses work in the soul, because the body remembers before the language catches up. Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life. A guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you, and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10 Zuru readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who are tired of living in the fog. Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment. You may have learned to walk past the empty place quickly, but deep inside you know the missing thing still leaves a draft. Some people told you to get over it, as if grief were a switch, but grief is more like a door that keeps opening in the same hallway. The Lord does not mock that hallway in you. He enters it gently, and he names the thing that was taken with the precision of a shepherd who knows every broken fence. It was not small to you just because others did not notice it. It was not minor just because you did not collapse in public. What was removed from your life can become the place where God shows you how carefully he keeps account of your tears. When you sit in that silence long enough, you begin to discern that the empty place is not proof of abandonment. It is often the very place where restoration starts to speak. You know the difference in your body when a memory is just a memory, and when it is a wound that still breathes. Your shoulders go heavy, your jaw tightens, and your hands become restless because they want to hold what is already gone. Maybe you have even felt that strange tiredness that comes from carrying an invisible argument all day, the one where you keep asking why it happened and why it took so long to stop. The heart can keep working while being bruised, but it works differently, more cautiously, as if it no longer trusts the room. That caution is understandable. It is also the place where healing and resentment begin to stand too close to each other. The enemy of your peace does not need to destroy everything at once if he can just persuade you to accept loss as your identity. But the Lord is not speaking to your bruised caution as though it were rebellion. He is speaking to it as evidence that you have endured, and that what hurt you did not cancel what he planted in you. There is a holy difference between surviving a theft and agreeing with it. You have survived too much to call that theft normal. You have prayed through too much to let the wound define the whole story. And even if your voice has become quieter lately, your spirit still knows the difference between defeat and a season that has not yet turned. What God is restoring will not arrive as an echo of the old pain, but as a new weight of peace that your body can finally recognize as safe. There is a scriptural echo here that reaches straight into ordinary life, like the woman who searched her house for what was lost until the lamp finally made the floor visible again. That picture matters because loss often hides in the places where light has been too weak, and suddenly a small beam reveals that the thing was never as gone as fear insisted. Your life may not look dramatic from the outside, but you know the quiet desperation of checking the same place twice, of hoping the missing thing will somehow reappear if you are patient enough. In spiritual language, that is where discernment begins to separate delay from denial. Delay says wait. Denial says it is finished. Those are not the same voice, and you have heard both. The old interpretation tells you that because something was taken, the story is reduced. The new revelation tells you that God can meet you in the exact place of loss and begin the return there. This does not erase the cost. It names the cost honestly and still refuses to make the cost final. What was taken from you did not become holy just because it hurt. What God restores will not be a reward for pretending. It will be a sign that your life is not governed by theft. If you keep listening, the ache itself can become a doorway instead of a prison, because even what broke you has been seen, and what is seen by God is never ignored forever. If this lands in you, write the words "Eu vejo isso" in the comments and come back to me. That phrase is not magic, but it is a small way of agreeing that the empty place is visible and that you are no longer hiding from it. When you write it, you are naming the moment when denial loses its grip and truth becomes easier to breathe. There is something powerful about simple recognition, because the soul stops carrying the burden of pretending. You do not need many words to be honest before God. You need only enough truth to stand still. The house may still look the same, the shelf may still be empty, and the drawer may still be open, but your inward posture is beginning to shift. That shift matters more than noise. It is how return begins before the outward evidence appears. The enemy depends on silence that keeps you isolated inside the wound. God uses honest naming to break that isolation without turning your pain into performance. So write it, and do not rush past the sentence. Let it settle. Let it teach your heart that what was hidden can be brought into the light without shame. This is the beginning of taking back the ground that grief tried to occupy, and once you have named it, you are ready to hear what comes next. There are moments when restoration starts with a simple inventory, almost like standing in a pantry and noticing which shelves were stripped bare and which ones still hold enough for today. You do not need to fake abundance to trust God with lack, and you do not need to despise the small things that remain in your life. The light on the kitchen counter, the cup in your hand, the quiet after everyone has left, all of that can become evidence that you are still being held. You may have been taught to measure your life by what disappeared, but heaven measures differently. Heaven also counts what remained intact when other things broke. That is why your current season may feel slower than your frustration wants it to be. Slow does not mean absent. Slow does not mean forgotten. It may mean that God is refusing to return something to you before your hands are ready to steward it. That is not punishment. It is protection. You were not abandoned in the pause. You were being preserved inside it. Some returns would have crushed you earlier because your soul was still raw, and what is coming back needs a stronger center to rest in. That is why the waiting has not been empty. It has been shaping your capacity. The room is not simply where a loss happened. It is where a new readiness is being formed, one careful layer at a time. And the same God who noticed the lack is the one who knows how to fill it without crowding your soul. You may have felt embarrassed by how much the missing thing still matters to you. There is a kind of loneliness in that embarrassment, because you begin to think everyone else should have moved on by now. But your tears are not evidence of immaturity. They are evidence that the loss touched something meaningful. A person does not grieve what never mattered. A person does not ache over emptiness that never carried love, purpose, or trust. So if your throat tightens when you think about it, that does not mean you are weak. It means there was value there. The enemy likes to make value feel like foolishness after the fact, but God does not speak that language. He sees what the void cost you, and He is not asking you to negotiate with your pain as if it were a character flaw. You are allowed to call the missing thing by its true name. You are allowed to say that the silence changed you. You are allowed to admit that some nights felt heavier because of it, and in that honesty you begin to separate reverence from attachment. Not everything you miss is meant to stay gone. Not every closing is a dismissal. Some closings are the prelude to a more careful opening, one that does not wound you the way the first one did. The restoration of God is not reckless. It is exact. It does not throw light everywhere without purpose. It returns what belongs in the way that helps you keep it. There is an old fear that says, if God brings it back, you will not know how to hold it without losing it again. That fear has kept many people from taking possession of what was promised to them because they would rather avoid disappointment than risk hope. But avoidance is a poor guardian, and fear is a dishonest teacher. It trains you to shrink your expectation until your spirit fits inside a smaller room than the one God prepared. The Lord is calling you out of that small room. He is not calling you into fantasy. He is calling you into readiness. Readiness means you can receive without panic, and you can wait without collapsing, and you can stand in the middle of a change season without asking whether your pain disqualifies you from joy. It does not. Your pain may be part of the story, but it is not the authority over the ending. What was taken may have taught you caution, but caution is not the same as wisdom. Wisdom says to watch, to pray, to discern, and then to move when God gives back the ground. There is a moment when grief must stop acting like a permanent landlord. That moment is not loud, it is sober. It is when you realize you can live with open hands again. What God restores will ask for stewardship, not fear. It will ask for a heart that is awake, not a heart that has numbed itself to survive. And you are being made ready for that very difference. If the old season taught you to expect loss, the new season is teaching you how to expect God without becoming naive. That is a deeper kind of faith, because it can remember what hurt and still refuse to bow to it. You can see this in small habits. How you check your phone less desperately, how you breathe before answering, how you no longer run after every voice that promises quick relief. These are not minor changes. They show that your inner world is being reordered. The Lord often rebuilds a life through quieter moves than the damage used. Theft is noisy when it happens, but restoration is often steady. It does not need to announce itself with panic. It arrives with integrity. It arrives with discernment, and it arrives in a way that makes you realize the wound was never the final architect of your future. The old interpretation said, once it is gone, it is gone. The new truth says, if God has kept it in His purpose, it can return without becoming a curse. That is why you are being asked to stand still long enough to notice what is shifting. Even your disappointments can become teaching moments when God is in them. Even your delays can reveal where the real treasure has been hidden. The enemy meant the loss to close a chapter of your life. God can use it to open a wiser one. The difference is everything, and you are closer to that difference than your feelings can tell you. Write the words "Esto pronto" in the comments, then come back to me. Do it as a declaration, not as a performance, because readiness is quieter than desperation and stronger than fear. When you say it, you are not claiming to know every detail. You are saying your heart is no longer resisting the return of what God decides to give back. That matters, because some things can only be received by a heart that has stopped arguing with heaven. You do not need to explain your whole story to prove that you are ready. You only need to agree that the empty place does not own you anymore. There is a kind of authority that comes when a person stops rehearsing defeat and begins to speak in alignment with truth. Readiness sounds like that. It is not loud, but it is unmistakable. It changes the way you sit, the way you wait, the way you pray after the prayer has become tired. It also changes the way you handle the memory of what was taken. Instead of treating memory like an enemy, you begin to let it become a witness that you survived. So write it, stay with it, and let the phrase settle deep enough to shape your next decision. What comes next is not a fantasy. It is the path of a heart that is being restored to receive. There are seasons when the return begins in places so ordinary that you almost miss them. A car parked outside a store, a quiet hallway, a sink full of dishes, a light still on after midnight. In those places, God often teaches you how to live without being ruled by the story of what was lost. You may have thought the breakthrough would feel dramatic, but sometimes it feels like your breathing finally slows down. Sometimes it feels like your mind stops circling the same sentence. Sometimes it feels like you can hear your own thoughts without them falling apart. That is not small, that is recovery. And recovery is one of the forms return can take before the outward answer appears. If you have been measuring God only by speed, you may have missed the way He has been restoring stability. A stable spirit can carry more than a frantic one. A stable spirit can receive without breaking the vessel. That is why you are being trained in steadiness before fullness. The pain taught you what volatility costs. The Lord is now teaching you what peace can hold. It may not look impressive to anyone else, but it is holy. The place where you once panicked can become the place where you stand calmly and know that you are no longer prey to every sudden fear. What was taken from you did not get the last word just because it made a noise on the way out. The quiet return of peace is already a form of restitution. The body tells the truth faster than the mouth does, and you know this because there were days when your smile arrived before your peace did. You learned how to look composed while your insides felt scattered, and that split between surface and soul is exhausting. It drains strength from the simplest moments. It makes ordinary decisions heavier than they should be. But now the Lord is working where the split happened. He is not forcing a false calm over the wound. He is bringing the wound into a place where it can be seen without being worshipped. That is a crucial distinction. The wound is real, but it is not your throne. The loss was real, but it is not your identity. You are not the person who was stripped down and left empty. You are the person God has kept through the stripping so that the return would not find you dead inside. That is a fierce mercy. It means your surviving was not accidental. It means your persistence was not meaningless. It means the nights you stayed awake with no answers were not wasted, even if they felt wasted then. Some of what you endured was not just endurance. It was preparation for a return that needs you awake. And if your body is still learning that peace is safe, God is patient enough to teach it. He can restore trust one breath at a time. There is also a hidden grief in being misunderstood during loss, because people often mistake your quiet for acceptance. They do not know the nights you spent naming the absence in your own mind. They do not know how often you had to swallow the sentence that wanted to come out, the one that said, "This mattered to me." But it mattered, and that is why the restoration is not trivial. You may have grown used to minimizing your own pain to keep the peace around you. That habit helped you survive, but it should not become your permanent language. God is teaching you to stop apologizing for the value of what was stolen. Some losses were spiritual, some were relational, some were emotional, and some were hidden in the slow erosion of confidence. Yet each one left a mark, and the Lord knows how to touch the mark without reopening the wound. That is why your healing may come with a strange mix of tenderness and firmness. Tenderness, because He will not shame you. Firmness, because He will not let the theft define the final shape of your life. What was taken did not become more powerful than what remains with God. It only looked louder for a while. The truth is quieter and stronger. Your life is still under divine notice. Your tears are still counted. Your future is still being written by a hand that does not forget. There are small signs that your inner posture is already changing, and one of them is that you are beginning to distinguish between what you feel and what is true. That distinction is a doorway. It keeps your pain from becoming prophecy, and it keeps your memory from becoming a prison. You may still feel the sting when you think of the loss, but the sting no longer has the same authority over your decisions. That is progress. That is the heart learning how to stand with dignity in a place of unfinished restoration. The old way said, wait until you feel nothing, then move. The new way says, move with God while feelings are still learning to obey. That is how possession begins. It is not reckless grabbing. It is faithful standing. It is looking at what has been withheld and refusing to speak as though the withholding were final. The enemy loves to keep you in a posture of hesitation because hesitation looks humble while it quietly surrenders territory. But you have not been made for surrender to theft. You have been made for discernment, for courage, and for the calm authority that comes when you know God still has the last word. The room may still look ordinary, but ordinary rooms can become altars when a person begins to believe again. And when belief returns, possession often follows. At this point, the story begins to move like a river that has finally found the channel it was always meant to cut through. The surface still looks calm, but underneath there is motion, direction, and strength. You can feel it when you stop asking whether the return is real and start asking how to receive without fear. That question changes your shoulders, your breathing, your attention. It makes you less interested in noise and more interested in alignment. This is where the Lord often begins to separate what was merely familiar from what is actually fruitful. Familiar things can return and still not be restoration. Restoration carries the weight of purpose. It does not just replace an object, a season, or a feeling. It restores meaning to what was damaged. That is what makes it holy. The loss wanted to convince you that emptiness was your permanent environment. God is proving that emptiness is only a temporary room, not your address. You have the right to stand up in that room now. You have the right to look at the gap and say, this is not the end of my story. You have the right to expect heaven to answer in ways that do not destroy your peace. And as that expectation matures, it becomes less like a wish and more like an inheritance being recognized. Think of a window that stayed shut through rain and wind, not because it was broken, but because it needed the right moment to open without damage. Some things in your life have been like that window. They were not absent because God forgot them. They were held back because timing matters when the inside of the house is still settling. You may have resented that delay because the weather around you felt harsh, but delay is not always refusal. Sometimes it is mercy disguised as patience. That is difficult to accept when you are the one waiting, because the heart wants immediate relief. Yet immediate relief is not always the same as lasting good. The Lord is concerned with more than the first touch of comfort. He is concerned with what remains after the touch, what stays in place, what can endure the next storm. That is why the restoration you are being prepared for may come with order, not chaos. It may come with clarity, not confusion. It may come with a sense of rightness that your spirit recognizes before your mind can explain it. The old theft thrived in disorder. The return will not. It will fit. It will settle. It will not need to borrow legitimacy from fear. And when it comes, you will know that the same God who let the storm pass over did so because the window was not meant to break. It was meant to open at the right time. Right, you vejo isso now if you recognize the river moving under the surface, and then come back to me. This is the middle pause, the place where recognition becomes agreement and the soul stops pretending not to see. You are not being asked to manufacture certainty. You are being asked to admit that something is shifting beneath the visible layer. That honesty matters because the Spirit often works where denial has been loudest. When you write those words, you are marking the moment where the current of restoration becomes visible to your heart. The room still looks like a room, but you can no longer pretend nothing is happening inside it. That is enough for now. That is holy enough. The next steps do not need your anxiety. They need your attention. The next steps do not need you to force the river. They need you to stop resisting the direction it is already taking. So write it, and let your words be simple. Let the phrase carry the recognition that what was hidden is being made clear. This is not the end of the movement. It is the place where you begin to cooperate with it. There is a reason the Lord keeps bringing you back to the places that once felt emptied, because He is teaching your spirit not to confuse a season of lack with a life of lack. That lesson matters in the practical world of bills, schedules, family conversations, and the quiet pressure of responsibilities that do not pause while your heart heals. You still have to answer messages, still have to get up, still have to make choices, and it is in those ordinary obligations that restoration becomes real. It is easy to speak of faith in a worship moment. It is more revealing to live it when the day is crowded and your emotions are tired. There, in the middle of what is unfinished, God teaches you how to manage the return with dignity. He teaches you not to rush ahead of clarity and not to refuse what He places in your hands because it looks smaller than the wound that preceded it. Small beginnings are often how restitution enters a life. First, there is peace in one conversation. Then there is clarity in one decision. Then there is strength where confusion used to sit. Then the old fear notices it has lost ground. That is how return works. It is not always theatrical. It is often cumulative. And each small, faithful response becomes a plank under your feet as you cross from grief into possession. Your emotions may still feel like they are arriving in waves, and that is not failure. It is the soul catching up with the truth. Sometimes a memory will still sting, while another part of you already knows the sting does not rule the day. That tension is real. You do not have to deny it to grow through it. In fact, God often uses that very tension to keep you honest. If the wound were instantly erased, you might miss the depth of what He is doing in you. But because the healing is layered, you are learning patience without passivity. You are learning faith without fantasy. You are learning how to take a breath before reacting, how to let truth settle before fear names the meaning. That is a quiet but profound transformation. The old you may have tried to control every outcome because uncertainty felt unbearable. The new you is learning that surrender is not the same as helplessness. Surrender is the place where you stop fighting God's method while trusting His intention. That trust is forming in you now, even if it still feels fragile. Fragile is not the same as false. A seed looks fragile, a root looks fragile, yet both are already doing hidden work. So do not despise the fragile stage. It is often where the deepest strength begins. You may have noticed that certain voices no longer reach you the way they once did. That is a sign of inner sorting. What used to drain you by the hour now feels obvious, and what used to flatter your fear now sounds thin. That is discernment growing teeth. It is also a mercy because restoration without discernment would only hand the same old theft a new opportunity. The Lord is not merely returning what was taken, He is teaching you how to guard it differently. That is why your sensitivity is increased. Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life. A guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you, and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10 Zuru readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who are tired of living in the fog. Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.